Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to be discussing 5 stories of various ships which sailed out into the ocean blue and never returned. What fates awaited these ships, and do we have any clues? Let's find out. Like and subscribe if you like content like this, and let's start with probably the most obscure of the 5, the HMS Juno. So if you've been around my channel for a minute, you should recognize this name. I talked about this ship briefly in my video about the HMS Eurydice. Like I said in that video, this ship had several names: HMS Mariner, HMS Atalanta, and HMS Juno. She was a 26-gun Spartan-class 6-rate frigate for the Royal Navy, and she was laid down in April 1842 and launched on July 1st, 1844. At the time of her disappearance, Juno had been renamed to Atalanta. And if it really is bad luck to rename a ship, then her crew, unfortunately, fell victim to this curse, because in 1880, she disappeared at sea with all hands. Let's go over what we know. Atalanta was serving as a training ship at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen at the Royal Navy Dockyard in Bermuda for Falmouth, England, on January 31st, 1880. That's it. She was never seen again. I sound like a broken record at this point, because that's basically all that happened in my last video about missing ships, too. They just up and vanished off the face of the earth. And due to the lack of any survivors, we don't know what happened to her either. A guess is that she sank in a storm, which we know crossed her route a few weeks after she departed. Her disappearance has been associated with legends of the Bermuda Triangle, as has another ship we'll be talking about later in the video. And a memorial was put up at St. Anne's Church, Portsmouth, with all the names of the 281 crew who perished in the disaster. The wreck of the Juno, or whatever you want to call her by, has never been found, but maybe one day someone will happen upon it, and maybe, just maybe, she can tell us what really happened. Until then, we just have to wonder. Though it was very prominent back in the day, the Inman Line is not very well remembered today. The Inman Line was a transatlantic service, one of the big ones in the 19th century alongside Cunard Line. One of their ships, the SS City of Paris, even held the coveted Blue Ridband for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic from 1889 to 91 and 1892 to 93, though the company never reached the historical heights and legacy of their rivals in hindsight. And one of their ships, the topic of the day, was the SS City of Boston. Sailing long before wireless technology would become used on ships, if a ship came into peril, then sometimes a passenger's only hope was that another ship would pass by. And in fact, in 1868, the city of Boston was actually that knight in shining armor for the passengers of the Wahens, or the Wabeno as some sources call her, which had struck an iceberg and was sinking. However, the passengers of the city of Boston in an 1870 crossing of the North Atlantic would not be as lucky as those on the Wahens were. No ship would come in at the last minute to save them. Sailing from Halifax, Nova Scotia for Liverpool, the city of Boston left on January 28, 1870, traveling along her regular New York to Halifax to Liverpool route. She had just shy of 200 people on board during this crossing, several of which were well-known businessmen and high-ranking military personnel. 55 cabin passengers, 52 steerage passengers, and 84 crew. Now on to her loss. After departing for Liverpool, she vanished and was never seen again. No trace has ever been found. A violent gale broke out only a few days after she departed, and this has been seen as a likely cause for her loss. Now, there were messages in bottles which washed ashore. It must have just been the rage back then to do that kind of thing. One of them said the city of Boston had collided with another ship and was sinking. Another message in a bottle claimed that there was a fire on board. None of the names of these matched the people who were on the ship, though. An additional note, however, was found on April 19th at Prince's Bay, Staten Island, dated March 2nd. It stated that a fire occurred on the ship, and it was signed with the probable name of one of the steerage passengers. There were many theories at the time outside of the gale causing the ship to sink. Striking an iceberg and sinking was also seen as possible, and suggested. And with the benefit of hindsight of history, we know rogue waves occur in the North Atlantic, and they can topple ships much larger and sturdier than the city of Boston. And of course, a fire on board cannot be ruled out either. Heck, a bomb being placed on the ship was even suggested back in the day. So any of these are possible, but there's one story that I do want to talk about. In 1900, Alicia Thompson, who was a cabin boy on the ship J.G. Norward, survived when the ship ran into a severe storm 3 weeks after leaving port at Galveston, Texas. Everyone but him was washed overboard, and he drifted alone at sea for days before becoming entangled in seaweed floating in the Sargasso Sea, which is a region of the North Atlantic Ocean bounded by four currents forming an ocean gyre, which is an area where there is a large system of circulating ocean currents, often associated with strong winds. While drifting in this area, Thompson said that he saw the floating wrecks of many ships, one of which was the intact and still floating, but eerily still and silent city of Boston. Thompson eventually escaped the Sargasso Sea by fitting out a lifeboat with a small sail and harnessing the wind. 3 weeks later, he was rescued and he wrote his story down. Obviously, the story cannot be verified. Again, I've said it before, but eyewitness testimony is the least reliable form of evidence. But the idea that the ship was drifting abandoned at sea for so long is just cool. I love that kind of stuff. What would he have found on board? I love a good ghost ship story. And obviously, if the ship was somehow still floating and trapped in that region of the ocean in 1900, she's most definitely sunk by now. But if the account is true, then you gotta wonder, what happened which led to her drifting abandoned at sea for decades? Today, the city of Boston is not widely remembered, just like the line she belonged to, and this memorial that you see on screen is one of the few which exist to commemorate and remember the loss. This is the one at St. Pancras Parish Church in London, and it bears the name of a family lost in the disaster. Whatever fate befell the city of Boston, it is likely the ocean will keep the secrets it holds so close within its depths from us forever. I doubt we'll ever find the wreck or whatever is left of it. All we have to remember the ship by are the drawings showing her in her glory days. I love the look of these hybrid steam-powered and sail-powered ships. They're just neat looking and really only existed in a small window of time as far as ship designs go. They only existed during the transition from sail to steam power. So this ship is very similar looking to the last one, and let's take a moment to talk about the design of the ship. She was also an Inman Line ship, the first one, built by Todd and McGregor of Partick, Glasgow, which was also her port of registry. She was ordered in 1849, christened and launched in February 1850. She was completed in April that year and had her maiden voyage in late April 1850. She had an iron hull and was able to carry 44 first-class passengers and 85 second-class passengers, along with roughly 1,200 tons of cargo within her accommodations. She was also the first Atlantic steamship to carry steerage passengers. Now, if you've seen the first video I did on this topic, you'll remember that the SS Pacific existed around this time, and that she had paddle wheels. Well, she, the City of Glasgow, used a propeller instead. You can see in the picture on the screen that she obviously doesn't have paddle wheels. And this allowed more space for the passengers. City of Glasgow was never built for speed. Her quickest crossing of the Atlantic took 14 days, 4 hours, 4 days longer than the current holder of the fastest crossing at the time. You'll remember that we talked about one of Pacific's issues being that she had to dash across the ocean, even go into iceberg fields at full speed. Well, City of Glasgow did not have that speed problem. She moved at a top speed of 9.5 knots and consumed 20 tons of coal per day. The fastest ship at the time, the Blue Ribbon holder Asia, consumed 76 tons per day for a little comparison. The City of Glasgow was the first steamship to travel from Glasgow to New York. She was purchased by the Inman Line in October 1850. After entering the immigrant trade in 1852, City of Glasgow was refitted to hold 400 steerage passengers within her hold. Now on to her loss. In March 1854, City of Glasgow left Liverpool with 480 people on board, 111 cabin passengers, 293 steerage, and 76 crew. She was under the command of Captain K. Morrison, his first voyage in command, but not his first voyage as a crew member on the ship, having served as her chief officer prior. She was bound for Philadelphia and due to return on March 25th, 24 days after leaving Liverpool. She was never seen again. City of Manchester, Glasgow's sister ship, encountered several icebergs in her crossing after leaving port on March 8. In fact, many ships said the ice was thicker than it had been in years. And at this time, it was not uncommon for ships to be weeks overdue. A recipe for disaster. At first, her owners assumed ice had delayed her and they weren't worried. The City of Glasgow was well stocked with plenty of water, food, and coal. But by the end of 1854, she was accepted as lost when no new sightings or news of the ship had been reported. Whatever happened, we can only guess. Her fate is not unlike that of the Waratah. Nothing has ever been found. Maybe she struck an iceberg, maybe she didn't. We'll never know unless we find her wreck. Since she had an iron hull, there's a chance we could find answers on it if we ever could find her. Now, it's worth noting that a portion of a bow of a ship washed ashore in late October 1854, which bore the name City of Glasgow in gilded letters, but this is seen today as part of another ship which had the same name and was lost earlier that month. No trace of the Inman Line's City of Glasgow has ever been found, and that's not likely to change. Her wreck lies somewhere on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, a silent grave for those who sailed on her during that fateful final voyage. Alright, we're finally out of the 19th century, but we're back in the Bermuda Triangle. So, pick your poison, everyone. This is probably the most famous ship to become associated with the Bermuda Triangle legends, USS Cyclops, the second U.S. ship to bear that name. She was a bulk cargo carrier built for the United States before World War I. Her name came from the giants of Greek mythology. She is most remembered today for her loss. She vanished without a trace in 1819 and took all 306 crew and passengers with her. The single greatest loss of life in history of the United States Navy, which didn't directly involve combat. First, though, a little bit of history. Cyclops was launched on the 7th of May, 1910. She had a length of 542 feet and a beam of 65 feet, as well as a draft of 26 feet rounded up. She could move at a speed of 15 knots and entered service in November 1910 with the Navy Auxiliary Service Atlantic Fleet, and she voyaged in the Baltic from May to July 1911 to supply 2nd Division ships. Afterward, she then operated along the East Coast and down to the Caribbean. During the 7-month-long Battle of Veracruz in 1914, part of the decade-long Mexican Revolution, she coaled ships on patrol there, and the State Department even expressed their gratitude for the ship and her crew in their part of evacuating refugees. After the United States entered World War I in 1917, Cyclops was commissioned on May 1st of that year. She joined a convoy bound for France in 1917 and returned to the United States safely later that year. Aside from one interruption, she served alongside the east coast of the United States until 1918. Then, she sailed to Brazilian waters to provide fuel for British ships in the South Atlantic. After this, she sailed from Rio de Janeiro on the 16th of February 1918 and entered Salvador 2 days later on the 20th of February. 2 days later, she then departed for Maryland with no scheduled stops along the way and was never seen again, except for a very dubious possible sighting on March 10th. Today, the reason for the loss of the ship is unknown. One explanation is that she might have sunk in a storm. Some thought a German raider or submarine might have sunk her, but the Germans denied ever being involved with her loss. One theory to explain her loss is the manganese ore that she was carrying in her hold. Manganese ore is much denser than coal, and the idea is that it moved around and caused a load shift, which would have made the ship list and become more vulnerable to foundering in bad weather. Another theory involves the ship suffering structural failure, something her sister ships suffered from as well, particularly where the I-beams that ran along the length of the ship were at risk of corroding due to the nature of the cargo she would carry. I brought up the Waratah, but I'll do it again now because this really reminds me of that. We just don't know. These people just vanished off the face of the earth, and we can only guess why. Maybe one day her wreck will be found, and will be able to give us answers. And by the way, as I briefly mentioned, Cyclops had 3 sister ships. All of them also sank, and 2 of them also vanished without a trace. Nice. Even though Cyclops is best remembered for her mysterious loss and lack of a known wreck, let's not forget the great deeds and achievements she made during her time in service. Those are incredible acts, and she should be remembered for those. For this last one, we're back in the modern day to show you that ships disappearing is not a phenomena of the past. Though admittedly the reason for this one going down is not very complicated, and unlike the others, we do know where the wreck is. This is the story of El Faro. So looking at the screen, you want to take a guess at what sank her? I bet you can't figure it out. So, the El Faro was lost back in 2015, and it's quite the story, so let's get to it. Since this happened in the modern day, we have a whole lot of information, so this will probably be the longest section in the video. Starting with a little bit of information about the ship, SS El Faro was a hybrid ship herself in a way, a combination of a roll-on, roll-off, hey, we just talked about one of those in my video on the MV Cougar Ace, and a lift-on, lift-off cargo ship. She was built in 1975, ordered in 1973, laid down in April 1974, and launched in November 1974, and completed in January 1975. So she had a 40-year career before her loss. So, let's set the stage for her tragic end. And for that, we have to start by setting the stage for Hurricane Joaquin, the catalyst of her loss. On September 30th, 2015, Tropical Storm Joaquin became a hurricane. For the rest of that day, the storm only continued to intensify, and by October 1st, she was tracking southwest. She grew to Category 3 level intensity by 11 p.m. that night. El Faro's second mate, D. Randolph, said in an email to friends and family, quote, "There is a hurricane out there, and we are heading straight into it." Now, why, you are probably asking, would El Faro sail right into a hurricane, which is only becoming more and more violent as the hours go by? Good question. El Faro's captain, Michael Davidson, planned on using El Faro's normal route and head directly to San Juan. He thought they would pass south of Hurricane Joaquin, though hurricane-level winds would be in the vessel's vicinity. Sounds all fine and dandy in theory, but you see, he misjudged the route that they needed and didn't take sufficient action to stay south of the hurricane. Shortly before the storm became a hurricane, he did decide to steer the vessel further south than she would usually go. It just didn't end up being enough, unfortunately. 10 hours after departing from Jacksonville for San Juan, El Faro attempted to avoid the hurricane, but less than a day later, the foreboding reports were heard. The U.S. Coast Guard received a satellite notification that the vessel had lost propulsion and was taking on water. though it added that for the time the flooding was contained and under control, but it had caused the ship to develop a 15-degree list to her port side. No attempts to open communication with the ship were successful, though messages from it were heard, as was a message from the ship's emergency position indicating radio beacon. One of the last positions from the ship, which was picked up, placed it within the eye wall of the hurricane. By October 2nd, a U.S. Coast Guard search had begun. Multiple types of helicopters were utilized to search the ocean, and still just terrible weather. One body was found drifting during the search, but it couldn't be recovered or identified. A deflated life raft from Faro and a heavily damaged lifeboat were also found. It was stocked with supplies, but no one was on board. By October 5th, the vessel was declared lost at sea, and MV Isabella was chosen to replace Faro. By October 31st, a vessel was identified sitting upright on the bottom of the ocean at a depth of 15,000 feet, and it was consistent with a cargo ship. On August 5th, 2016, the ship's voyage data recorder was recovered from the wreck. In Jacksonville and San Juan, twin memorials to the ship were erected. There is an additional memorial at Rockland, Maine, where 5 of the deceased crew were from. That's not all, though. Since the recorder was recovered, we know a minute-by-minute account of everything that happened. I'm going to read aloud some of the snippets that were recorded before the ship sank. They paint a very vivid picture, so tread lightly. Viewer discretion is advised. This is pretty harrowing because these are the final words from some of the crew before the ship sank. At 6:54 a.m., Captain Davison took a phone call describing the situation on the ship. It's miserable right now. We got all the wind on the starboard side here. Now a scuttle was left open or popped open or whatever, so we got some flooding down in 3 hold. A significant amount. Everyone's safe right now. We're not going to abandon ship. We're going to stay with the ship. We are in dire straits right now. Okay. I'm going to call the office and tell them. Okay. There's no need to ring the general alarm yet. We're not abandoning ship. The engineers are trying to get the plant back. So we're working on it. Okay? 7:06 a.m. Davidson made another phone call. I have a marine emergency and I would like to speak with a QI. We had a hull breach. A scuttle blew open during the storm. We have water down in 3 hold. We have a heavy list. We've lost the main propulsion unit. The engineers cannot get it going. Can I speak with a QI, please? We have since secured the source of water coming into the vessel. The scuttle blew open. It's since been closed. However, 3 holds got a considerable amount of water in it. We have a very, very healthy port list. The engineers cannot get lube oil pressure on the plant. Therefore, we've got no main engine. And let me give you latitude and longitude. I just want to give you a heads up before I push that button. The crew is safe. Right now, we're trying to save the ship now. But, all available hands. We are 48 miles east of San Salvador. We are taking every measure to take the list off. By that I mean pump out that hole the best we can, but we're not gaining ground at this time. Right now, it's a little hard to tell because all the wind is on that side too, so we got a good wind heel going, but it's not getting any better. 7:15 a.m. The chief comes up to the bridge to report news from below. I think that water level's rising, Captain. Okay. Do you know where it's coming from? First, the chief said something hit the fire main. It got ruptured hard. Is there no way to secure that? We don't know if they still have any pressure on the fire main or not. Don't know where's C between the C suction and the hull or what. But anything I say is a guess. 9 minutes later, at 7:24 a.m., the situation had rapidly deteriorated. We still got reserve buoyancy and stability. Following this order, the second mate was instructed to ring the alarm and wake the crew. About a minute later, the captain can be heard shouting, quote, "Bow is down! Bow is down!" At this point, the order to abandon ship was given out. "Get into your rafts! Throw all your rafts into the water! Get everyone off! Get off the ship! Stay together!" Captain Davison spent the next several minutes trying to help a panicked helmsman get off the bridge. Meanwhile, alarms were ringing out all around them. The captain told the helmsman to, quote, "Work your way up here." Remember, the ship was basically rolling over at this point. Some of the other things the captain told him were, quote, "You're okay, come on," and "I'm not leaving you, let's go." The helmsman kept shouting that he needed a ladder, a line, someone to help him. And at 7:39 a.m., while he and the captain were still on the bridge, the recording stops. None of El Faro's crew survived the sinking, and the ship still rests on the bottom of the ocean. So last time there was a bonus story, and why not have another one for those who watched the whole video? Today it's cheating a little because this ship didn't really disappear. We know what happened, but we're going to talk about it anyway because it's really interesting. We're going way back for this one to 1511, so we can talk about the loss of the Flor de la Mar and her legendary cargo. I'm going to keep this short and just summarize this one. Again, it's kind of cheating. The Flor de la Mar, which means flower of the sea, was a Portuguese carrack, a 3 or 4-masted ocean sailing ship. In 1511, Alfonso de Albuquerque, do you think he took the left turn at Albuquerque? Decided he wanted to use the flower to transport a whole lot of treasure looted from the Sultan of Malacca's palace back to Portugal. Despite the flower being called unsafe, he was not dissuaded and took her to sea. And she sank. She was wrecked in a storm and crashed into shoals, eventually sinking on the 20th of November off the coast of Sumatra. Albuquerque survived using a makeshift raft, and he was rescued from the sea, but the treasure was all lost, along with more than 400 men. The flower of the sea has never been found, and neither has the treasure she was carrying. Portugal, Indonesia, and Malaysia all claim salvage rights, so if she was ever found, it would probably be a shitstorm. You gotta wonder, though, where is she? We know the general area she sank in, so why has not even a single trace of any gold or jewels ever been found? Either way, the most valuable shipwreck in history remains undiscovered on the ocean floor, one of the great enduring mysteries of the sea. Well, I hope you enjoyed these stories. There's so many more that I want to cover, but I just couldn't in the interest of video length. Tell me if you want to see more of them. If I do cover more and make a part 3, SS Cabana will definitely be one I cover. That one doesn't really get any attention, and I want to do my part to make sure that she isn't forgotten. She is just one of many who deserve to have their stories told. I think in part 3, whenever I make it, we'll talk about her, the MS Hans Hentoff, and I'm not sure what others. Maybe we'll talk submarines in it as well, because there's just a crazy amount of those which disappeared without any traces, and some of those disappearances are kind of baffling. The SS Lord Spencer is another ship I could cover, since it's almost completely unknown to most people today. And I also want to make a video about the RMS Titanic, specifically the last few minutes of the sinking, and just cover why they were just utter chaos. Next, though, we're probably going to go back to a paleo topic. I might finally get my Pyroraptor script edited together and ready to go. Until then, go check out the first one of these I did, along with other videos like it. Like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, and tell me topics you'd like to see me cover in the future. There's all kinds of stories of wrecked ships, missing ships, and ghost ships throughout history. Also tell me, if you could sail on any of these ships during a safe crossing, which would you pick to sail on? Alright then, until the next video, have a good one everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. And stay a minute, because I'm going to play some recording bloopers now for your amusement. Have a good one. If you've been around my channel for a minute, you should recognize this name. I talked about this ship briefly in my video about the HMS Eurydice. Like I said in that video, this ship had several names: HMS Mariner, HMS Atalanta, and HMS Juno. She was a 26-gun Spartan-class 6-rate frigate of the Royal Navy, and she was laid down in April 1842 and launched on July 1st, 1844. At the time of her disappearance, Juno had been... Though it was very prominent back in the day, the Inman Line is not very well remembered today. The Inman Line was a transatlantic service, one of the big ones during the 19th century, alongside Cunard Line. One of the ships... Though it was very prominent back in the day, the Inman Line is not very well remembered today. The Inman Line was a transatlantic service, one of the big ones in the 19th century, alongside Cunard Line. One of their ships, the SS City of Paris, even held the coveted blue ribband for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic from 1889 to 91 and 1892 to 93, though the company never reached the historical heights and legacy of their rivals in hindsight. And one of their ships, the topic of the day, was the SS City of Boston. Sailing long before wireless technology would become used on ships, if a ship came into peril, then sometimes a passenger's only hope was that another ship would pass by. In fact, in 1868, the city of Boston was actually that knight in shining armor. Sailing from Halifax, Nova Scotia for Liverpool, the city of Boston left on January 28, 1870, traveling along her regular New York to Halifax to Liverpool route. She had just shy of 200 people on board during this crossing, several of which were well-known businessmen and high-ranking military personnel. 55 cabin passengers, 52 steerage passengers, and 84 crew. Now on to her loss. After departing for Liverpool, she vanished and was never seen again. No trace has ever been found. A violent gale broke out only a few days after she departed, and this has been seen as a likely cause for her loss. Now, there were messages in bottles which washed ashore. It must have just been the rage back then to do that kind of thing. One of them said the city of Boston collided with a... I love the look of these hybrid steam-powered and sail-powered ships. They're not just neat-looking, they really only existed in a small window of time as far as ships goes. Again, they existed during the transition from sail to steam power. So, this ship is very similar looking to the last one, and let's take a moment to talk about the design of the ship. This was also an Inman Line ship, the first one, built by Todd and McGregor of Patrick of Glasgow. It's Patrick, not Patrick. To supply 2nd Division ships. Afterwards, she then operated along the East Coast and down to the Caribbean. During the 7-month-long Battle of Veracruz in 1914, part of the decade-long Mexican Revolution, she coaled ships on patrol there, and the State Department even expressed their gratitude for the ship and her crew in their part of evacuating refugees. After the United States entered World War I in 1917, Cyclops was commissioned on May 1st of that year. She joined a convoy bound for France. Aside from... That's not even the right...